Gentlemen, welcome to the Mighty Men Project. My goal is to both strengthen and empower men of God so that they can be a source of strength and power to those who depend on them. Today, we're going to be discussing Adam versus Eve, when the great failure meets the great lie. Let's open our Bibles to Ephesians 2, verse 10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we could walk in them. It's no secret that men are struggling today, and the unfortunate reality is that most of men's problems are rarely given much serious thought. Those few troubled areas that do manage to rise to the surface are often derisively cast back at men, while simultaneously refusing to engage in any actual discourse on a societal level concerning the matter. At best, society seems to merely tolerate men as long as they fall in line, and at worst dismisses them as utterly disposable, as they collapse and crumble under the weight of heaped expectations and lack of any real help or guidance. In short, men are entirely expendable and replaceable, and as such are not worth the effort of saving. And lest anyone misunderstand, this is sadly prevalent even in, and I would argue especially in, the modern church. In fact, it is the modern church and its religious leaders that I'm going to specifically focus on today. While there are numerous reasons for the spiraling phenomena of failing men, the purpose of this article is not to cast blame, pity ourselves, or to lash out at those we feel are responsible. If that is the spirit you find yourself in now, and understand, gentlemen, I do empathize. Do your best to still your spirit. For now, we are going to focus our attention on examining the reality of our situation and how the enemy continues to lure humanity into fighting itself with the same old tricks since Eden. Let us quickly set the stage and take a look at the passage listed above that we just read from Ephesians. The word workmanship in that passage means a work or creation, a poem, a deed or an action. I chose this verse in particular to serve as the foundation of our discussion because of this very word usage. In a society that tends to portray men as little more than tyrannical, knuckle-dragging fools, it is important to remember this very crucial detail. It takes a balanced sum of many complex and wondrous parts woven together to form a whole man. Our flesh was lovingly crafted from the dust to glorify our God's power and intelligence. Our hearts sing with the poetry of the natural world as well as the very life He breathed into us. And the strength of our deeds and convictions are relentlessly driven by our love of and devotion to those around us. All of these things are crucial, and if you dismiss or ignore any one of them, all you end up with is a confused and aimless man. As stated before, we won't be delving too deeply into the many institutions and individuals who share in the blame alongside our own failings. But we can, at the very least, take a scriptural look at just how the enemy pulled it off. In reality, what men in the current generations are experiencing isn't new. In fact, we've fallen for the same trap that the enemy has utilized since Nakash, or the serpent, approached Eve in the garden. The Genesis 3 account of the fall of man has a lot to unpack, but we're going to hone in on a specific point. That is, the unique interactions the enemy had with Adam and Eve in order to engineer their fall and usurp their birthright. Notice that Nakash never talked with Adam. In fact, he seemed to ignore the man outright. Instead, he went directly to Eve with his temptation, and in this we see not only the depths of the devious intelligence the enemy wields, but also a vivid and horrific demonstration that while we may lie to ourselves about any given matter, he knows exactly who and what we are, as well as how to exploit us. When men and women stand united as we were designed, we represent a larger picture of a divine whole, whose respective gaps in ability and strength are not only merely covered by the other, but effectively draws out our respective abilities to further heights. If the enemy had threatened Eve, Adam would have stepped in as the masculine power to deal violently with the threat, as he was designed to do as the head of his family and God's appointed steward of the earth. If the enemy had attacked Adam, Eve would have stood at his back and anchored him with the gentle repose that is beautifully unique to the feminine spirit, lending him not only any necessary healing, but a focused purpose that would unleash and even magnify his natural strength against any danger threatening her. While our society attempts to redefine and repurpose sex and gender, make no mistake, the enemy knows exactly how our Creator shaped us. Men are the defenders, the aggressors, the providers. We are the masculine expression of an all-powerful God. And what is masculinity, if not a roar of defiance in the face of those who would distort or pervert the natural order of creation? A line drawn in the sand that protects those who shelter behind them and destroys the threats before them. Had Nakash attempted to confront Adam, he risked a violent confrontation, and at that time would have been thoroughly outmatched, as man was still the dominant force over the entire earth and its denizens, while obviously still being subjected to God. Remember that fact, men. Burn it into your mind and sear it deep within your heart. If Adam had fought, the deceiver would have fallen. The enemy was very aware of this, so to avoid a potential conflict with Adam, he instead went straight for the man's greatest weakness, the one point in his armor that was vulnerable, the crown of creation, the jewel of the entire earth, the beauty of the universe made manifest in his eyes, his Eve. Let us open our Bibles now to Genesis 3:1-6, where we see the serpent talking with Eve. The serpent said, "Has God really said, 'You shall not eat from any tree of the garden?'" The woman said to the serpent, Nakash, "From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die.'" The serpent said to the woman, "You certainly will not die, for God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband with her, and he ate. In 6 short verses, we see the master plan in which all of creation was doomed to unfold, and how easily men and women were stripped of their divine authority. As tragic as this tale is, however, it does provide us with some insight into ourselves and our respective weaknesses, as well as how the enemy manipulates them to their own benefit at our expense. Let's start with Eve. In 1 Timothy 2:14, we read, "And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a wrongdoer." This verse, as well as the chapter that contains it, has become a very unpopular verse in the modern church, and one would be hard-pressed to find a modern religious Christian leader willing to risk discussing it. If one had to wager a guess, it's likely because it provides an undeniable perspective to the rebellion in the garden. Adam was not fooled by the enemy. Eve was. Read the Genesis account carefully, and we can see exactly how he did it, and how he continues to do it even today. Start by asking yourself a simple question. What could anyone possibly offer to a woman who had everything already? She had the perfect husband, the perfect home, and not a care in the world other than to enjoy eternity in a paradise handcrafted for her by a creator that she got to physically walk and converse with on a daily basis. The answer is as simple as it is depressing. More. That's all the enemy had to offer Eve to tempt her away from everything she had. In order to get her to accept the lie of, "You will not die," he immediately offered the twisted truth of, "Your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil." This was his great gamble to the woman, that she would overlook the lie in hopes of attaining the more. Despite already having everything she could ever need, she left it all for something she coveted. She didn't even fully understand what it was that was being offered, having no knowledge of it until after she ate the fruit. Only that she didn't currently possess it. Her reaction is telling. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took some of its fruit and ate. She did not simply take Nakash at his word, at least initially. Instead, she spent the time necessary to justify her decision to herself in ways that seem reasonable on the surface, but were ultimately still a deliberate rebellion on her part. She observed the tree, she studied the fruit, she considered the reward, then she ate. In short, the enemy fed her a simple lie with a vague promise and let her convince herself to disregard the boundaries given to her, all the while growing in confidence that it was the right thing to do. While Nakash is responsible for presenting the temptation and was punished for it, and for those of you seeking a deeper dive into this particular story, consider the translation Nakash as well as the curse he suffered. It goes far deeper than a mere snake being forced to crawl on his belly. Eve actively allowed herself to be deceived because while she didn't know what she wanted, she knew she wanted more than she had. We see in her reaction the telltale signs of hypergamy or hypergamy, the natural feminine counterpart to a man's masculinity. Despite what we might think today, hypergamy is no more inherently evil than a man's masculinity, but the way in which it is utilized will determine whether good or evil comes from it. The great lie, as I often refer to this moment between the enemy and Eve, was not the lie that he told her, but the lies she told herself in order to justify believing the enemy over God. She then immediately gave some to her husband, which is where we will pivot to Adam and the crux of the problem facing modern men. Now, before we dive into Adam's failure, we need to take a moment to observe an uncomfortable truth for some. Eve was not Adam's purpose. Adam had already received his identity from God prior to Eve's creation. We see this in Genesis 2:15. Eve was his helpmate and his counterpart, the second half of a divine whole that amplified his purpose with deeper meaning. When he took her as his wife, he accepted the responsibility that came with it. She, in turn, was grafted into his purpose and gave it the feminine expression that he himself was incapable of. While many hold a grudge against Eve and lay the blame of the fall on her shoulders, and subsequently on women at large, God and the scriptures clearly do not. Like Adam, she was held personally accountable for her contribution to the fall, but it was the man who ultimately bore the responsibility of the rebellion, and for good reason. This wasn't God playing favorites, but him adhering to his design. Whereas Eve's failure was the catalyst for the fall, it was Adam who allowed it to happen. We read in James 4:7, "If the man had fought, the enemy would have failed." And therein lies his great failure as I refer to this particular moment. Adam did nothing. Some assume that Adam was simply not present during the interaction between Nakash and Eve, but that's never stated in Scripture, and I'm hesitant to ascribe such assumptions to the story, even if it is tempting to justify absolving Adam of some of his responsibility in the matter. In the end, it's entirely moot, as Adam made the same fatal choice regardless. He followed Eve down instead of standing firm with his Creator. Whereas Eve allowed herself to be deceived and chose to heed the serpent, Adam was not fooled. He consciously decided to abandon his station and take Eve's lead over God's law. Adam's rebellion was not that he fought and failed, but that he never bothered to fight at all. While it's easy to look at this situation from our vaunted perspective and shake our heads and waggle our fingers at a man who should have known better, take a moment to consider the horrific position his docile actions, or lack of action, had brought about. He didn't intercede on Eve's behalf when Nakash approached her, which allowed the lie to reach her heart. He did not resist the lie when Eve was studying the tree, which allowed her the chance to justify the lie to herself. When she reached for the fruit, he did not snatch it from her, and when she ate, he was suddenly left with a terrible choice. Watch the love of his life and the pinnacle of beauty in all of creation die alone, or die with her. His passive attitude towards the great lie, and the one perpetuating it, was entirely his fault. The scriptures clearly state he himself was not deceived by it. He simply did nothing to stop it. It was because of that weakness he was placed in a situation where the woman was doomed and he was helpless to save her. Note, his purpose as of yet was still unaffected. He was still unblemished and retained his stewardship of the earth, but due to his refusal to engage the enemy when it could have made a difference, he would be doing it without her forever, doomed to watch her fade as a tainted creation while he lived on in perfection. Bear in mind that this does not in any way, shape, or form justify his decision. There was nothing noble about his accepting the fruit from Eve when she offered it, but it is important that we acknowledge the position he had placed himself in. Because he failed in his masculinity, Eve was left to pervert her femininity to the destruction of the perfect world. This is the position we find ourselves in once again, with the same lies and vague promises permeating our society and even our church, with the same results. Eve is still chasing after more, even as she destroys everything she had, and Adam grows increasingly apathetic and unwilling to engage with the enemy to the point where he has largely forgotten how. This is the problem that we need to address as the body. When you dig past the overlapping branches of bitterness and seemingly endless layers of anger, loneliness, and petty vengeance, it is the great lie and the great failure that truly plague us at the roots. The enemy only had to pit us against one another, and our respective curses would take care of the rest. Adam no longer toils against the snares and thorns to keep his house free of corruption, and Eve is obsessed with towering over Adam amongst her grove of forbidden fruit trees. Both are miserable, and neither are willing to help the other. Practically, men have simply lost their purpose and identity. They go to work, they pay their taxes, they play their games and consume their pornography, but they are sleepwalking through a life lacking in any genuine passion or meaning. Their flesh has grown weak and flabby, their hearts no longer beat with the power of creation, and their convictions have been buried beneath anger and apathy. They know instinctually they should fight. After all, Western society has all but collapsed on itself, and modern religious Christianity is a shameful parody of its origins, but have either forgotten how or simply don't see the victory worth pursuing anymore. We have been effectively neutralized, told to sit down and fall in line while Eve, our families, and our communities are marched into the fire. This message certainly comes from society at large, but as of late has been perpetuated specifically by the pulpit. The Western Church does not think Eve needs saving. nor that men should rise in their masculinity to fend off the threats. They don't train men how to actively combat the enemy or even how to identify him, preaching the same safe and soft messages of comfortable religion that we have heard for decades while demons do cartwheels in the church foyer. The solution is not simple, gentlemen, but it is vital. For our part, men must learn how to connect with their Creator and reestablish their personal relationship with Him in order to understand and utilize the natural strengths we were designed to exhibit. Put down the video games and dedicate yourself to learning a skill. Set aside the pornography and master your body and impulses instead of letting them drive you. Stop treating a fallen Eve as your purpose and learn how to actually protect her while pursuing the practical applications of your talents and abilities. Stop leaning on a church and religious leaders that have abandoned sound scriptural doctrine for comfortable Christianity. If your community is not supporting you, find a brother or sister who will and support them in turn. Understand that the situation unfolding in our world goes hand in hand with what is happening outside of it. We see this in Matthew 18, verses 18 and 19, and that we can have a direct impact on it. Stop being distracted by the machinations of the enemy and the men and women who actively subsist on them, and grow in true masculinity. It's true that the world will hate you, but that will be the case regardless. You might as well become a mighty man in the process. As we close today, let us take a moment to consider our weekly meditation and ask yourself this question. What order would you prioritize this list and why? Rescue Eve? Save Eden? Learn your identity? And engage with your purpose?